But you can probably look, which is what we did back in May, at the past 20, 40 years of observation of one sector and say, look, we've gathered enough information in this area, understanding the changes and see what's laying behind, to say this sector is sort of doomed. It's going to keep retreating no matter what the climate does. It might retreat faster if climate warming continues at this pace. It might retreat slower. We don't know that absolutely for sure. But the fuse is already blown. The idea is still probably a little bit of a shock for some people in our community, but I've been looking at this area long enough to be quite sure about that.
I guess one area, so it's kind of a case of we know it's going to happen, we're not sure when. Would that be how you would characterize?
Yes. The time scale is the big issue. I think the community in general is very conservative with timescales. All the observations we've collected in the past decades are actually pointing towards shorter timescales than what the models are able to replicate. It's true for sea ice. The sea ice decay, most of the models are not able to replicate that. It's true for the decay of glaciers and ice sheets. They're going on a pace faster than what the models projected and faster than even the present-day models are able to replicate. So a lot of the changes we're witnessing, we actually don't have any reference in time to say we know how it happened in the past, we know at what pace these things can retreat. There's no example of that. All the records of collapse of marine ice sheets have been bulldozed by re-advance of the glaciers. So these records don't exist. We know how fast some of the land terminating ice sheets can collapse, and they can collapse pretty fast. So the marine ice sheets, they probably can do it a lot faster. We probably are seeing that today in several parts of Antarctica and Greenland. But it's a little bit shattering to say, hey, this is it, right? Even for the scientists looking at it. It's kind of a big step to say, I think this place is falling apart.
How do we communicate this to the public?
I don't know, but we're not doing a good job at that. I think most of the scientists are not trained for that, so they'll be taken by surprise. They don't know how to deal with that very well. I'm trying to learn. I talk to people actually from digital media to ask them, how do we reach the people? The feedback I get right now is you guys really suck at it. You're not doing it right. I can tell that you're not trained to do this. The message is not passing. You talk about these things like, business as usual, this glacier is falling apart, West Antarctica is going to be in an irreversible state of retreat. And the people who listen to that may not click. They feel like, well, it doesn't seem so shattered by this, so why should I worry about it? Right? We should be a little bit more vocal and direct about these things. You have somehow to take your scientist hat off and take a different hat to communicate that. You cannot communicate to the public the same way you communicate to your colleagues. It has to be a different level of communication.
Today, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is above 400 parts per million, a level not seen any time in the history of human life on Earth.
We are increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere at rates far greater than any of the most rapid events that happened in the deep geological past. There is no precedent for what we are doing to the atmosphere. It is an uncontrolled experiment.
As you warm the environment, that causes the release of more carbon, which is either methane or carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. That in turn increases the rate of warming, which releases even more carbon. And you can see how this begins to cause a so-called positive feedback, or just an ever-increasing amount of heating.
At the end of 2012, the World Bank issued a report warning governments around the world that a 5-degree temperature increase is likely unless drastic action is taken to curb carbon emissions. And a 6-degree increase was, according to some scientists, all it took to pass a tipping point during the Permian mass extinction.
Abrupt climate change is not just an abrupt change in climate itself. But slowly changing climate can push systems, including human systems and ecological systems, past thresholds themselves.
And it is possible that you push something very gradually and suddenly it hits stuff that we care about. Either the storm surge is just below the levee in New Orleans and people living in New Orleans go about their business, or it's just above the levee in New Orleans and people in New Orleans are very, very unhappy about that. And a very gradual change in sea level, if we don't respond to it, can lead to an abrupt change with the water is in the city or it's in the subways of New York or what have you. And we have a lot of things that we've built that may be vulnerable to a gradual change, pushing them over a threshold and causing an abrupt issue for us.
People talk about Katrina as the last major hurricane that hit the United States in 2005. Well, Sandy technically wasn't a major hurricane, but the damage was major hurricane. I don't think people care whether the wind speed was this mile per hour, that mile per hour. What they care about is, oh my God, this thing just destroyed my home, and it wasn't a major hurricane. How does this happen? So I think with climate change, we've got to put an asterisk on these storms now, because now storms that technically aren't major hurricanes are causing major hurricane damage, and sea level rise is a big part of that.
The last time it was 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warmer than it is now, sea level was about 25 meters higher. That's 80 feet.
The Greenland ice sheet is actually quite vulnerable to collapse. We've always thought, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, most scientists thought the Greenland ice sheet was quite stable. But what we're seeing now today, and scientists studying the Greenland ice sheet are seeing rapid retreat rates in many of the tidewater glaciers.
Actually, the Greenland ice sheet is deglaciating, it's retreating, it's drawing down the interior of the ice sheet faster than the models assume.
In fact, the last time that ice sheets disintegrated is 14,000 years ago. Sea level went up 20 meters in 400 years. So that's 1 meter every 20 years, 5 meters a century. And that would be incredibly disastrous.
It's not just a question of beach houses, it's a question of sewage treatment plants. It's a question of folks in poor neighborhoods who can't afford to move out of low-lying areas because of sea level rise, who can't afford to move out of, farmers who can't afford to pay the higher electrical cost to pump that water out of the ground. This is about our surviving on the planet.
Is it possible that we have overestimated the dangers? Is it possible to be a little better? Sure. Is it possible to be a little worse? Sure. Is it possible that CO2 breaks things that we really care about and things are a lot worse than we expect? Yes, it is.
The last time that ice sheets disintegrated was 14,000 years ago. Sea level went up 20 meters in 400 years. So that's 1 meter every 20 years.
NASA's lead polar ice researcher said, quote, "This is really happening. There's nothing to stop it now."
It in fact looks like this weak underbelly of Antarctica is in fact starting to flow out into the sea, and there's not a lot to hold it back.
Following publication of the new study, author Dr. Eric Rignot, writing in The Guardian, pointed out that while at the current rate of melt the area might take 200 years to flow into the sea, evidence indicates the rate will continue to accelerate. Dr. Rignot pointed out that many similar glaciers in vast East Antarctica are less well studied. He wrote, "Just one of those, Totten Glacier, represents by itself a full 22 feet of sea level rise."
Dar Jamail is on the line with us. He's the investigative journalist and staff writer with truthout.org, where you will find my writings pretty much every day, and two of my books, actually, in their entirety published over there. Dar, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. Twitter, by the way, at Dar Jamail, DAHRJAMAIL.
On a regular basis, also in the same 2 years, and this is the new normal. This isn't an anomaly. It's certainly aberrant. It's a new phenomena in human geologic terms, but human timescale terms, not geologic. Because what you mentioned earlier about abrupt climate change. Paul Beckwith, who's a climatology and meteorology professor and a specialist in paleoclimatological records at University of Ottawa in Canada, he said, look, we are looking at, he says we are already in the very beginning stages of what he calls abrupt climate change, where we could look at that 5 to 6 degrees C that we've been talking about from methane or from other factors. He said we could be looking at that in the next 10 to 20 years. But that said, what's also interesting is talking about abrupt climate change is even the International Energy Agency, which is a conservative, very conservative energy agency, their most recent predictions are calling for a possible 5 to 6 degrees C global temperature increase by 2050. So we're starting to see now a trend where the abrupt climate change predictions and even conservative predictions from a group like the International Energy Agency.
The World Bank is saying it now too.
Them too are all kind of starting to coalesce. And so now what's being left in the dust is the worst case predictions for the International Panel on Climate Change, calling for a maximum 5C increase by 2100. They're being left in the dust.
Yeah, absolutely. This is serious, serious stuff, and we need to cut through this Republican obstructionism and denialism. This is arguably worse than Holocaust denialism because we're talking about the entire human race. It's amazing. Dar Jamail, truthout.org. Thank you, Dar.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Keep up the great work, my friend.
Is pointed to.
While it appears we've already passed the tipping point for an ice-free Arctic in the summer, other tipping points could be centuries, generations, or just years down the road. The big danger about tipping points is that you can only recognize them when it's too late to do anything about it. So why should we risk these catastrophic events? In the case of climate change, our planet's life support system is at stake. So it is our obligation to take every precaution to stop it.
We must begin to reduce carbon emissions dramatically. Yet at this moment, we're facing a crisis of world leadership. Powerful fossil fuel corporations are fighting to monetize the trillions of tons of carbon they own that's still underground. Every day, we are witness to more climate-related events. The world community, global citizens, governments, leaders, NGOs, and corporations must come together, step forward, and take decisive action. In order to combat this issue, we must create the largest movement in human history, and it could mean our very survival. Let's not wait until we reach more tipping points. This is the most urgent of times and a most urgent message. To learn more and join the movement, go to greenworldrising.org.
Implications. So our projection of the overall warming of the Arctic, again, if we do nothing about it, is that a 95% range will be between 6 and 16 degrees centigrade warming, with the best estimate being 10 degrees centigrade warming. And that's why there was 70% chance of being greater than 8 degrees. But it's quite possible to be significantly above 10 degrees centigrade, at which case, it will just be how fast will Greenland totally lose its ice sheet and other very risky outcomes.
Out and you get a release into the atmosphere. We expect this tipping point, which is essentially when the Arctic changes from absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And we expect this to occur within 20 or 30 years. We expect the permafrost to release roughly 120 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere by 2100.
And of course, releasing all of these greenhouse gases from all of the stored organic matter in the Arctic region is another amplifier in the system. So that's what is the big risk, is that you're just activating more and more amplifiers that'll take the human-driven part of it and accelerate it. So it's a big risk, and we ought to be doing things that will lower the risk, and pretty much that means we need to stabilize the level of greenhouse gases at levels that are not too much greater than those we have today.
3/4 of it just in 30 years.
The Arctic could warm somewhere between 6 and 16 degrees centigrade by the year 2100 and continue to warm after that, of course. for sure by then you'll have activated the release of some of the methane and carbon dioxide, and of course we would lose all of the summer sea ice. That is already occurring, and that's another amplifier in the Arctic climate system.
Yeah, the Arctic is kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Do you say this in English? So it's the first thing that actually gives an alarming signal to the rest of the planet.
The reason we haven't seen as much action as we should on climate change is there is a very successful, well done, and well funded contrarian campaign to discredit science, to highlight uncertainties, to delay action. And the companies doing this are, of course, the oil companies and the coal companies. Rich industries in the past, whenever they've been threatened due to scientific findings that say their product is dangerous, will launch PR campaigns to try and minimize the danger, delay action, and so on. We saw this with the tobacco companies, the asbestos industry, the chlorofluorocarbon industry when the ozone hole was found. And some of these same PR firms and some of these same scientists that were involved in those campaigns are now working on behalf of the oil companies to delay action. And they've been very successful. They're very good at it.
Anything we can do to slow down carbon dioxide emissions is going to help some. As I said in the beginning, though, we've already put so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that carbon dioxide lives a long time in the atmosphere. So even if we could stop completely now, we're still looking at a lot more change coming our way. So, but I still, that's kind of a gloomy, a gloomy outlook. But that said, anything we can do to slow down additional emissions is worth doing.
The only way to really prevent the permafrost carbon feedback from starting is to reduce fossil fuel emissions. And I think that is the key. Your viewers, if they walk away with the idea we must reduce fossil fuel emissions, and just so, not to sugarcoat it or anything, but we really have to reduce it by 80 or 90%.
We can't wait for perfect knowledge of what those thresholds are. So one of the things we do, that's why we do many forecasts with different assumptions, to sort of show the spread of the outcomes. And that enables you to say, now if I stabilize it at levels not too much greater than what we have today for greenhouse gases, that you lower the risk, particularly of very large amounts of warming in the Arctic region. And it's dramatic to see what the lowering of the risk is. And we need to start that now. We can't wait until the researchers say, we've finally pinned down exactly what the threshold is. I think by the time that happens, with great accuracy, again, we will have been building up the greenhouse gases to higher and higher levels in the meantime. So I think we've got to go on both fronts. We need to move to mitigation by lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to continue the research to understand more and more at what levels of warming do you get these dangerous outcomes for not just for the local regions, but for the planet as a whole.
Like so many of us, I saw his film An Inconvenient Truth about the impacts of global warming, and it scared the emojis out of me. In Al Gore's film, he describes how our Earth is in peril. Climate change stands to affect all life on this planet. From monster storms, raging wildfires, record droughts, ice caps melting, acidification of the oceans, to entire countries going underwater. That could all be caused by humans' demands on the Earth. With scientists warning unless we take drastic measures to correct our environmental footprint, our time on this planet may be limited to only 50 more years. I wanted to do everything I could to help. I made up my mind right then and there to change how I lived and to do whatever I possibly could to find a way for all of us to live together, in balance with the planet sustainably forever. I started to do all the things Al told us to do. I became an OCE, Obsessive Compulsive Environmentalist. I separated the trash and recycling. I composted, changed all the light bulbs, took short showers, turned the water off when I brushed my teeth, turned off lights when leaving a room, and rode my bike instead of driving everywhere. But as the years went by, it seemed as if things were getting worse. I had to wonder, With all the continuing ecological crisis facing the planet, even if every single one of us adopted these conservation habits, was this really going to be enough to save the world? It just seemed that there was something more to the story. I thought I was doing everything I could to help the planet. But then, with one friend's post, everything changed. The post sent me to a report online published by the United Nations stating that cows produce more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. This means that raising cattle produces more greenhouse gases than all cars, trucks, trains, boats, planes combined, 13% compared to 18% for livestock. This is because cows produce a substantial amount of methane from their digestive process. Methane gas from livestock is 25 to 100 times more destructive than carbon dioxide from vehicles. Here I'd been riding my bike everywhere to help reduce emissions, but it turns out there's more to climate change than just fossil fuels. I started doing more research. The UN, along with other agencies, reported that not only did livestock play a major role in global warming, it is also the leading cause of resource consumption and environmental degradation destroying the planet today. How is it possible I wasn't aware of this? I thought this information would be plastered everywhere in the environmental community. I went to the nation's largest environmental organizations' websites, 350.org, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, Climate Reality, Rainforest Action Network, Amazon Watch, and was shocked to see they had virtually nothing on animal agriculture. What was going on? Why would they not have this information on there? It seemed the main focus for many of these groups was natural gas and oil production, with fracking being the latest hot issue due to water usage and contamination. Hydraulic fracturing for natural gas uses an incredible amount of water. A staggering 100 billion gallons of water is used every year in the United States. But when I compared this with animal agriculture, raising livestock just in the US consumes 34 trillion gallons of water. And it turns out the methane emissions from both industries are nearly equal. Living in California, a state plagued by drought and water shortages, water use is a major concern for many of us.
The average Californian uses about 1,500 gallons per person per day. About half of that is related to the consumption of meat and dairy products. So meat and dairy products are incredibly water intensive, in part because the animals are using very water intensive grains. That's what they eat. And so all of the water embedded in the grain and that the animal eats essentially is considered part of the virtual water footprint of that product.
I found out that 1/4 pound hamburger requires over 660 gallons of water to produce. Here I've been taking these short showers trying to save water, and to find out just eating one hamburger is the equivalent of showering 2 entire months. So much attention is given to lowering our home water use, yet domestic water use is only 5% of what is consumed in the US versus 55% for animal agriculture. That's because it takes upwards of 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. I went on the government's Department of Water Resources' Save Our Water campaign, where it outlines behavior changes to help conserve our water, like using low-flow shower heads, efficient toilets, water-saving appliances, and fix leaky faucets and sprinkler heads, but nothing about animal agriculture. When I added up all the government's recommendations, I was saving 47 gallons a day. But still, that's not even close to the 660 gallons of water for just one burger.
I think that the problem with a lot of organizations that are focused and have a laser focus don't go off message because they don't want to piss off another whole group of people that will make their lives difficult.
If you listen to the majority of the major environmental organizations, they're not telling you to do much besides live your life the way you've been living it, but change your light bulb from time to time, drive less, use less plastic, recycle more. It's better for their fundraising and better for their profile to create a victim and perpetrator sort of plot line.
You know, it's like when we talk about the fact that when we have a dysfunctional family and the father is an alcoholic, that's the one thing no one talks about. Everybody goes around that, and yet it's the one thing that's causing the devastation in the relationships in the family because no one wants to talk about it.
How could these organizations not know? I mean, the issue is right in front of them. It's unmistakable at this point. And just like these organizations, they're falling over themselves to show the general public that climate change is human-caused. And in doing so, they completely fail to see what's right in front of them, that animal agriculture, raising and killing animals for food, is really what's killing the planet.
We're at over 28 billion animals were pulled out of the ocean last year. They're not ever given a chance to recover. They can't recover. They don't multiply that quickly. They don't, they don't come back. We're not giving them an opportunity.
The oceans are in complete collapse. The large fish species are nearing extinction.
The way fishing is done today to feed the demand for 90 million tons of fish is primarily through massive fish nets. For every single pound of fish caught, there's up to 5 pounds of untargeted species trapped, such as dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and sharks, known as bykill. If we were to imagine this same sort of practice happening on the African savanna, targeting gazelle, but in the process scooping up every single lion, giraffe, ostrich, and elephant, nobody would stand for it. Yet, this is what is happening in our oceans every single day.
Between 40 and 50 million sharks each year are killed in fishing lines and fishing nets as bykill. Then their fins might be cut off or not cut off, but they're caught initially as bykill, and it's from fishing. It's from fishing in a sustainable manner, in many cases, for fish that are labeled sustainable by, for instance, Oceana and these sustainable certified organizations. So my thought is that why would we want to stop at banning shark fin soup if you're concerned about sharks, which all these organizations are, and most of the public at large is now. If we really are concerned about sharks, we would ban fishing.
I went on the world's largest ocean conservation group's website, Oceana, to see what they were doing about this. On their site, along with a TED Talk by CEO Andy Sharpless, I was astounded to read they actually recommend that one of the best ways to help fish is to eat fish. With the world's fish population in near collapse, this seems like saying the best way to help endangered pandas is to eat pandas. I couldn't understand how Oceana could say we could remove close to 100 million tons of fish per year, and that could somehow be sustainable and good for our oceans.
Many of the species that
die, we die. That's not a tagline. That's the truth.
Perhaps the only other ecosystem that is being destroyed at such a rapid rate are the world's rainforests. Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second. And it is estimated that every day, close to 100 plant, animal, and insect species are lost due to rainforest destruction.
When we talk about, in comparison, all those different causes of deforestation, what is causing the most trees to fall, for example? I think it would definitely be agriculture. Unfortunately, one of the biggest causes of deforestation, definitely in the Brazilian Amazon, is agribusiness, cattle grazing, and soy production in particular.
This is really what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's like no Greenpeace or no one's really saying the whole story?
The whole story about one of the main cause of deforestation.
Yeah.
And I think you brought up some really good points about why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And I think in Brazil in particular, I think when we look at what happened after the Forest Code was passed, and people who were standing up against the lobbyists and the interests, the special interests, the cattle industry, the agribusiness industry, what was happening to them? A lot of people who were speaking out got killed. And if you look at, say Carlos, you look at Claudio, there's people who are putting themselves out there and saying, cattle ranching, is destroying the Amazon. A lot of those people who are really putting themselves out there, and look at Dorothy Stang, the nun who lived out in Pará, who was killed. A lot of people will speak up. A lot of people just keep their mouths shut because they don't want to be the next one with the bullet to their head.
Hey, sorry we didn't get back to you earlier. I have some bad news. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns and have to pull out.
Why was this subject so controversial? The first person I could think to speak with was Howard Lyman, who had been sued by cattlemen for simply speaking the truth about animal agriculture. on The Oprah Winfrey Show.
I was born on the largest dairy farm in the state of Montana in 1938. Grew up my entire life on a livestock farm, went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture, came back and started a mega agricultural endeavor where I had 10,000 acres of crop, 7,000 head of cattle, and about 30 employees. So I spent 45 years of my life in animal agriculture, and so I've been there, done that. When I was on the Oprah Show, we had the food disparagement law. Now, the food disparagement law, in my opinion, was unconstitutional, but what it basically said, that it was against the law to say something you knew to be false about a perishable commodity. I didn't say anything on the Oprah Show I thought to be false. I went there and told the truth. Now, it took 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up extricating myself from the suits from the cattle industry. But if I was to go on the Oprah Show today, say exactly the same thing today that I said back then, I would be guilty. And for me, when they were talking about the food disparagement law, it was the fact of whether I told the truth or not. You can go today and tell the truth, and you will be guilty, because if you cause a disruption in the profits of the animal industry, you're guilty under the Patriot Act.
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Of course. If you don't realize right now that you're putting your neck on the chopping block, you know, you better take that camera and throw it away.
The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. I think most people in this country are aware of the influence of money and industry on politics, and we really see that clearly on display with this industry in particular. Most people would be shocked to learn that animal rights and environmental activists are the #1 domestic terrorism threat, according to the FBI.
And why is that?
It's a difficult question to answer, why these groups are at the top of the FBI's priorities. I think a big part of it is that they, more than really any other social movements today, are directly threatening corporate profits. You know, when we try to find out how factory farms and how animal agriculture is polluting the environment, they try to claim exemptions to that information, either under national security terms or public safety, trademark issues, business, it's a business secret. We've seen all these attempts to keep people in the dark about what they're actually doing. You know, one of the largest industries on the planet with the biggest environmental impact, trying to keep us in the dark about how it's operating. Through the Freedom of Information Act, we obtained documents from the Counterterrorism Unit that show they were monitoring my lectures, media interviews like this one, my website, my book.
Are we at risk filming this and showing it?
You're going up against people that have massive legal resources. I mean, it's just overwhelming, the amount of money at their disposal, and you have nothing. And I think that fear is a big part of the tactic as well.
Will was right. I was scared. When I learned about the activists being killed in Brazil, I was disturbed, but I felt removed. But to learn about American activists and journalists being targeted by the industry and FBI, my funding being dropped, I was genuinely worried and it hit close to home. Was this why no one was willing to talk about the issue? I decided to take precautionary measures with all the footage I shot. I was beyond frightened to imagine what could possibly happen if I pursued this subject any further. It seemed the only decision to make was to put down the cameras and walk away. But then, I realized this issue was way bigger than any personal concern I could ever have for myself. This was about all life on Earth hanging in the balance of our actions. Now you either live for something or die for nothing. And I actually had no choice all along. I decided then to surrender not to fear from the secret, but rather to a cause towards truth. I couldn't be like these environmental organizations and sit silently while the planet was being eaten alive right in front of our eyes. I had to stand up and continue on.
When you go meatless on Monday, if you ascribe to that campaign, you're essentially contributing to climate change, pollution, depletion of our planet's resources, and your own health, then on only 6 days of the week instead of 7. You're creating a false justification, clearly a false sense of justification for what you're doing on those other 6 days of the week. So in other words, we really shouldn't be resting on our laurels of what you do right only 1/7 of the time.
You can't be an environmentalist and eat animal products, period. Kid yourself if you want. If you want to feed your addiction, so be it. But don't call yourself an environmentalist.
1,000 more people are born to the planet every day. Every day. It's extraordinary. But what's really extraordinary is you need, per day, 34,000 new acres of farmable land. It's not happening.
To feed a person on an all plant-based vegan diet for a year requires just 1/6 of an acre of land. To feed that same person on a vegetarian diet that includes eggs and dairy requires 3 times as much land. To feed an average U.S. citizen's high-consumption diet of meat, dairy, and eggs requires 18 times as much land. This is because you can produce 37,000 pounds of vegetables on 1.5 acres, but only 375 pounds of meat on that same plot of land. I also learned the comparison doesn't end with land use. A vegan diet produces half as much CO2 as an American omnivore, uses 1/11th the amount of fossil fuels, 1/13th the amount of water, and an 18th of the amount of land. After adding this all up, I realized I had the choice every single day to save over 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forested land, the equivalent of 20 pounds of CO2, and one animal's life every single day.
Renewable energy infrastructure, such as building solar and wind generators all over our country to reduce climate change, that's a pretty good idea, but it's projected to take at least 20 years and at least minimally $18 trillion to develop. It's important to realize that we don't have that long of a time frame. We just talked about how it might be a 3 to 4 year time frame, so we don't really have 20 years, and we really don't have $18 trillion to develop these. So another solution to climate change, we could stop eating animals. And it could be done today. It doesn't have to take 20 years, and it certainly doesn't have to take $18 trillion because it costs nothing.
Quietly and unmistakably, the most powerful thing that someone can do for the environment. No other lifestyle choice has a farther-reaching and more profoundly positive impact on the planet and all life on Earth than choosing to stop consuming animals and live a vegan lifestyle.
Do you realize 75% of Americans consider themselves to be environmentalists? You don't think we couldn't solve this problem in a heartbeat? I'll tell you what, all we would need is for the environmentalists to live what they profess, and we'd be on a new course in the world.
We will not succeed. When you take the animal out, well, you also take the greenhouse gas issue out, and you take the food safety issues out, and you take some of the other externalities related to food scarcity out. But one thing that's amazing is, I think you put our values back in. You put values like compassion and integrity and kindness, values that are natural to human beings. You put that in. You build that back into the story of our food. And I think as this begins to progress, I think it also helps people to pause before they eat that egg, before they eat that steak, before they eat that chicken nugget, and ask themselves, is that really what they want? Or do they actually want something more?
I had to come to the full conclusion the only way to sustainably and ethically live on this planet with 7 billion other people is to live an entirely plant-based vegan diet. I decided instead of eating others to eat for others. At first, like these environmental groups, I was afraid of what it'd mean to change, but now I embrace it. All this talk about sustainability sounded like our planet was on some sort of life support, and I don't want her to simply survive or to sustain, but to thrive. Life today is not about sustainability, it's about thrivability. She's given so much to us for so long, it was time to give back. 108% of everything we have. It felt good. It was in alignment.
And we see this movement not just about providing cheaper and inexpensive food that everyone can have, but also a spiritual move. A move towards understanding who we really are and how we can really connect to each other.
Do what you can do as well as you can do it every day of your life, and you will end up dying one of the happiest individuals that ever died.
This is about massively transforming how our society eats because it's a necessity.
It's acting on what we know and acting kindly and gently on the whole planet and with other people to accomplish the goals of living better. We can do it, but we have to choose to do it.
You can change the world. You must change the world.